The movie opens with a woman named Iris, lying next to her sleeping husband, and she seems very disturbed. She gets up early in the morning and grabs a red toy boat and a pocket knife. Iris leaves her cell phone behind, gets in her car, and drives somewhere. After driving for a long time, she arrives at a desolate park, where she pulls over and begins climbing a small cliff. Iris soon reaches the top, where she comes across a memorial dedicated to a little boy. She gazes at his picture for a while before carving an M into a tree with the pocket knife. Following this, Iris approaches the cliff's edge and decides to unalive herself. Despite her hesitation, she seems to really want to do it. But just when she's about to jump, a man appears out of nowhere and starts talking to her. Iris asks him to go away, but he refuses and introduces himself as Richard. He mentions that he saw a memorial back there and believes it belongs to someone close to her. He understands she wants to be alone because he wants to be alone too, which is why he came here. Next, Richard opens up about his tragic past and reveals how he once got in a car accident in college and lost his girlfriend, Chloe. The worst part is that they were fighting just before the crash and saying hurtful things to each other. Richard describes how he couldn't move for 2 months and was trapped in a hospital bed. Upon hearing this, Iris is moved, and she decides to open up about her son's death. She reveals how her family had come to this place to spend some fun time together. Her husband was carving their initials into a tree, while Iris was gathering wildflowers. Unfortunately, when their son was collecting sticks for roasting marshmallows, he stumbled off the cliff and died. Iris wishes God should have taken her instead of her young son. In response, Richard sympathizes with her and states that he won't do anything to change her mind about what she has already decided. But he tells her that today is a beautiful day and that being broken doesn't mean hopelessness. Richard then proceeds to leave. But moments later, after some consideration, Iris finally changes her mind and follows him. The two soon arrive at their cars and say their goodbyes to each other. Richard asks if she will go back to the cliff again after he leaves, but Iris responds, "Not today." Following this, the two try to leave, but Iris notices that Richard's car is parked too close to hers, and she can't get in. Therefore, Richard gets out to help her, and he suddenly asks why Iris keeps calling him Richard. And then this happens. He ties her hands and feet with rope and proceeds to put her in his vehicle. Sometime later, Iris wakes up and finds herself in the backseat of Richard's car while he is driving. She tries to call someone with her watch, but he informs her that there's no signal in the area. Richard casually brings out her son's red toy boat and begins mocking her. At this point, Iris recalls her knife and distracts him with small talk about Chloe while carefully cutting the bindings on her hands. She then asks what he intends to do to her, to which Richard reveals that he has a small cabin in the woods where they will go, and he will braid her hair. Just then, Iris manages to free herself and attacks the man with her knife. She fails to hurt him seriously, and the car crashes into a nearby tree. After the crash, an incensed Richard grabs Iris' hair, so Iris uses a belt to suffocate him. After some struggles, she manages to escape. She uses her knife to cut the ties around her feet, but Richard catches up to her. He then shows her an empty syringe and informs her that he injected her with a relaxant drug that will make her completely immobile in about 20 minutes. She will first lose feeling in her fingers, then her legs will tingle to the point where she can no longer walk. And finally, she won't be able to speak. Upon hearing this, Iris becomes terrified and flees into the woods to get away from the psychopath. Richard calmly follows, warning her that running will only cause the drug to work faster. The young woman continues to run as fast as she can and sets a timer on her watch for 20 minutes. But unfortunately, the effect begins to take hold on her legs, and she can barely walk. Soon, she drops to the ground as she can no longer feel her legs. Now that she's unable to run, Iris decides to hide among the roots of a tree. However, she unknowingly positions herself near an anthill, and the ants begin crawling onto her body and her face. This causes her to scream, revealing her location to Richard. But before he can catch her, Iris crawls into a small river, hoping that the current will carry her away. Richard warns her that she won't be able to swim, but Iris is willing to take the risk rather than be captured. After floating for a while, she musters all of her strength to grab a log and get out of the river. When Iris checks her watch, she sees that she has only 1 minute left. She still tries as hard as she can to reach a safe point, but her time runs out, and she becomes completely paralyzed. Shortly after, Iris notices a farmer mowing the lawn nearby but is unable to ask for help. The old farmer, named Bill, soon approaches her and asks if she needs any help, but Iris can't answer. He soon realizes that she's conscious and that only her eyes can move. So, they begin communicating with 1 blink for yes and 2 for no. Bill understands that she's in trouble and assures her he will call the cops and get her help soon. After this, the kind old man brings a wheelbarrow to lift her up and take her inside his cabin. Bill then tries to call for help, but someone suddenly knocks on the door, so Iris blinks several times, and Bill realizes she is trying to alert him. He finds Richard at the door, who claims he is looking for his injured wife and that they were in an accident. Bill requests that he wait outside while he calls for help. However, the psychopath ignores him and enters the house. When he fails to find Iris, he pretends that he doesn't feel well and needs to rest. He also asks the old man for his phone, claiming that he lost his during the accident. Enraged at the sudden intrusion, Bill threatens to call the cops. But Richard begins to cry out of nowhere and urges him to go ahead and do it. Seeing this, the old farmer asks for his name, to which Richard responds that it is Andrew. He reveals that his wife, Chloe, has mental problems and always accuses him of doing terrible things. Richard claims they had an accident during which he lost consciousness, and when he woke up, she was missing. He further explains that she sometimes enters a catatonic state, in which she refuses to speak or move. Richard expresses his fear that if the cops find her, she will be institutionalized, and he doesn't want to lose her. During this, we see Iris hiding behind the couch and next to the window, listening to everything. Bill feels bad for the young man, and when Richard asks if he has anyone else in his life, Bill responds that he had a wife who died of a heart attack. Bill is now convinced that the young man is morally good and decides to tell him the truth about Iris. But then, Richard's phone begins to vibrate in his pocket, even though he claimed it was lost earlier. This finally makes Bill realize that the man is lying, so he tells him to leave the house. However, Richard knows that Iris is hiding here, and he asks the old man where she is. To get him off his back, Bill lies that he indeed found a woman by his shed and kept her there. Richard moves toward the shed but asks for the old man's phone first. And then this happens. Next, Bill contacts the police to report an intruder in his home. The 2 men get into a fight, but Bill proves to be very strong for his age. He brutally beats the psychopath and knocks him to the ground. The tough old guy gives him a few solid kicks to the waist. However, Richard begins to distract him by discussing how he caused his wife's heart attack. He reaches for a nearby knife, stabs the elderly man in the leg, and then repeatedly stabs the poor man to death. Following this, Richard picks up the phone and discovers that the cops were on the line the entire time. He gets enraged and pours gasoline all over the house to set it on fire. Meanwhile, we see that Iris is somehow managing to move her finger and trying to alert the psychopath, but to no avail. After setting the house on fire, Richard proceeds to leave in Bill's truck. Iris tries to reach the curtain rope, and when Richard looks back at the house, he notices the curtains opening and closing on their own. Realizing that she is still inside, Richard quickly returns to the house and takes her away. He then blames her for making him do this. As they drive away, Richard informs Iris that he has never killed a man before, but there's always a first time. Suddenly, he receives a call from his daughter, who excitedly informs him of the good grades she received on her recent test. She reveals that she and her mom are coming to his cabin to celebrate the news. But this only upsets Richard, and he talks to his wife about it. He insists that this is his alone time at the cabin, which he needs to be the best version of himself. However, his wife states that these alone times have been happening more frequently as of late, so they are coming anyway. Richard is annoyed upon hearing this, but he reluctantly agrees. Shortly after, they stop at a gas station, and Richard notices some firefighters on their way to Bill's house. He then goes inside to pay for the gas. Meanwhile, we see that Iris's hands are starting to regain some mobility, so she tries to alert the people there. She somehow unbuckles her seatbelt, and when a child approaches her window, she is flooded with memories of her son. Soon, the child's mother arrives to take him away, and Iris gives her a strange look to warn her of the danger. Richard realizes that there are more people near Iris, so he immediately returns to the truck. He puts the seatbelt back on her and continues on his way. Not long after, they arrive at the scene of the earlier accident, where Richard changes his clothes. He then takes another drug-filled syringe and places it on the truck's dashboard. However, as he grabs a hook to tow his damaged vehicle, a cop shows up. The officer says he received a report regarding his truck and needs to investigate. It turns out that some people from the gas station were worried about Iris's strange look and called the cops. The officer asks to talk to Iris, but Richard reveals that she is too drunk and can't speak. He claims that his wife had an accident and he came to help her. However, the officer is skeptical because the caller saw them at the gas station, and Richard has a wound on his forehead. At this point, Iris manages to slowly roll down the window and attempts to alert the officer. Soon, Iris manages to move her lips and utters the word help. And then, when the cop gets distracted, the psychopath brutally beats the policeman until he dies. He then loads the officer into his police vehicle and steals his gun. After that, he sets the patrol car on fire, ensuring that no evidence remains of his crimes. Next, we notice that the syringe he put on the dashboard earlier is gone. Richard is freaked out that he has killed 2 people already, and decides to put the blame on Iris. Iris, who can now speak again, begins to talk to him about Chloe's death. She questions whether it was because of her death that he went crazy. Hearing this, the man stops the truck in anger and declares that he is not crazy and that he found clarity when she died in the accident. When Richard watched Chloe die from snapping her neck, he found his true calling. It gave him immense satisfaction, and he felt like a god, someone with the power to end people's lives. He also admits that his last words to her before she died were, "Thank you," since she helped him discover his true purpose. Hearing this, Iris is flabbergasted, but she tries to remain calm and pleads with him to let her go. She claims that she doesn't know his real name or address and promises that she will not report him. Iris also urges him to think about his wife and daughter, questioning how they will feel when they find out about his actions. She asks him to leave her somewhere on the road, suggesting that they can both forget this ever happened. However, Richard refuses to listen to her and says that he has a change of plans. Shortly after, they arrive at a restricted area by a lake, where Richard reveals that this is their final stop. He says it's a shame their time has to end like this, as they would have had a great time in the cabin together. All of a sudden, Iris stabs him with the syringe, but she doesn't have enough strength to press it down. This allows the man to calmly eject the syringe and pour the drugs out of it. Frustrated, Iris questions why he didn't just let her die earlier, to which Richard responds that it was fate and she was meant for him. However, she argues that there is no fate, no God, and he is just a sad little man without a name. Following this, Richard grabs a knife, places Iris in a rowboat, and gets in himself. He then rows to the middle of the lake, where he intends to throw her in with some bricks so her body won't float. But before he can do that, Iris begins to cry and asks him to do her a last favor. She tells him that she has Mateo's toy boat in her pocket, which she wants to hold as she dies. And when Richard gets closer to her to get the toy, Iris swiftly grabs the knife from his belt and stabs him near his throat. This causes a gravely injured Richard to fall into the lake. He desperately tries to climb back up, but Iris grabs his gun and shoots at him multiple times, causing him to fall into the water again. Unfortunately, while shooting frantically, Iris ended up creating holes in the boat. It soon begins to sink, and it appears that she is going to die as well. But miraculously, despite her hands being tied, Iris refuses to give up and swims to the surface with all of her strength. In the final scene, we see Iris resting at the dock, breathing a sigh of relief. However, she notices in the distance that Richard has also managed to rise to the surface. She approaches him and observes that he is choking on his own blood and is on the verge of death. The movie then comes to an end as Iris tells Richard this.
Thank you.
Thus, we reach the end of this film. Thanks for watching. You can like this video to support us. Don't forget to subscribe for more content. See you in the next video. Goodbye.